Hello everyone, welcome to Ansarkari. So today we'll be taking up the newspaper for 10th of May. So over here, the first article, the Pakistan-Turkey nexus. So over here in this article, we basically explore the defense and diplomatic cooperation between Pakistan and Turkey and its implications for India. So Turkey has emerged as in Pakistan's second largest arms supplier and a steadfast ally in the current situation. And recently, India also revealed how the Turkish-made drones, especially the Songa drones, were used by Pakistan-based terror groups to target Jammu and Kashmir. And these drones are capable of carrying assault rifles and grenades, making them a significant threat in the asymmetric warfare. So, Turkey's interest in Pakistan is driven by a mix of ideological solidarity, regional ambition, and defense diplomacy. Both countries have supported each other diplomatically, especially in international platforms like the OIC, which is Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and the UN. So, where Turkey is consistently backed by Pakistan's stance on Kashmir since 2003, um, under the Erdogan's leadership, Turkey has actively positioned itself as a global Islamic power and has sought stronger ties with Muslim majority nations like Pakistan. So, when we talk of Pakistan on its part, it benefits from Turkish defense exports and military training. And Pakistan has procured Turkish warships under the MILGM project and collaborated on drone technology. So, this basically highlights how Turkey's stance against India has been consistent, even blocking India's participation in international events such as the G20 meet in Turkish occupied northern Cyprus. So, in response to this, India has recalibrated its foreign policy to counter this axis by strengthening its partnership with countries opposed to Turkish foreign policy, such as Greece, Armenia, and Cyprus. So, India's outreach to Armenia, including the supply of military equipment and the growing defense ties with Greece and Cyprus, reflects a strategic balancing act. So, this article ultimately underscores the evolving nature of regional alliances and India's proactive geopolitical adjustment in the face of emerging security threats. Then we have the next article, New Light on COVID Deaths, How Officials Counts Revise Earlier Estimate. So this article discusses the revision of the official death toll of COVID-19 in India based on data from the civil registration system for the year 2021. So it revealed how there had been significant underreporting of COVID deaths in several states, with Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, and Uttar Pradesh showing highest discrepancies. So these findings, they are based on comparing the number of registered deaths in 2021 with the average death in the pre-pandemic and estimating excess deaths. Deaths which went beyond the expected norm, which likely include COVID-19 fatalities. So, for an example, Gujarat, it showed a difference of over 4.2 lakh deaths compared to its officially recorded death of only around 10,000 for 2021. Similarly, high burden states like Andhra Pradesh and Bihar also exhibited wide gaps. And in contrast, northeastern states like Meghalaya and Mizoram, they're relatively better reporting accuracy. So the article notes how the National Health Mission and the Ministry of Health have not officially explained these gaps, but they significantly impact how the pandemic is assessed and managed. So the revised data has implications on understanding India's public health response, their trust in the data system, and international credibility. So the WHO had earlier estimated India's death toll to be far higher than official figures, leading to debates on data transparency. So the article basically highlights the need to strengthen the death registration system, integrate real-time data reporting, and ensure consistency across states for future crises. So overall, the crisis stresses the that understanding the true toll of pandemic is not just an academic exercise, but critical for policy planning, compensation to affected families, and restoring public trust. So, for UPSC aspirants, basically, this article offers insights into health governance, role of credible statistics in democracy, and ethical challenges for disaster management. The adversaries ally, India's need to guard against Pakistan's friend, old and new, China and Bangladesh. So this article basically shows strategic implications of Pakistan-sponsored terrorism, highlighting the continuity of Pakistan's proxy war strategy through state-sponsored non-state actors and India's evolving counter-terror doctrine from diplomatic restraint to military retaliation. Also, evolution of India's security doctrine. So basically, a shift in India's counter-terror strategy from the passive diplomacy, which was post 2001 and 2008, to actively defense in from 2016 onwards. So even Operation Sindoor that symbolizes strategic messaging and psychological warfare linked to cultural symbolism, where Sindoor basically meant uh, symbolized a sacred honor. Then over here, we're also talking about how India took diplomatic and economic measures. So basically, the Indus Water Treaty of how India leveraged hydro diplomacy as a pressure tool, which shows how we are. The strategy that we adopted was more diplomatic, economic, and kinetic actions to working in a tandem. Then also we're talking about external balance and international reaction, such as China's role in as Pakistan's ally. It reflects complex bilateral relations and India's vulnerability to two-front threats. And even U.S. neutrality shows limitations of India's partnerships in crisis. And even Bangladesh's possible stand basically hints how India is at a fragile eastern frontier security and also the need for careful neighborhood diplomacy. So, India is basically preparing to fight not just kinetic wars but also narrative wars through strategic communication and civil defense training. So, this basically underlines the need for public preparedness and resilience in hybrid wars. Then we have the next article IMF board clears loan to Pakistan. So the IMF, which is International Monetary Fund Executive Board, approved disbursements to Pakistan. So $1 billion under the extended fund facility and $1.3 billion under the resilience and sustainability facility. So, India, while being part of the IMF board, it abstained from voting, expressing strong dissent over Pakistan's repeated misuse of these funds and its poor record of compliance with IMF reform conditions. So, India's concern, they were twofold. One was how Pakistan's track of borrowing IMF funds repeatedly, which was 28 out of the last 35 years, without meaningful reforms, and also possible misuse of fungible IMF resources to fund state-sponsored cross-border terrorism against India. So this shows India's strategic diplomacy, how India used abstention as diplomatic tool to register within the IMF rules, and it also shows how India is balancing institutional protocol with national interest and security concerns. Also, critique of IMF lending patterns, how Pakistan has received funds for IMF programs since 2019, raising concerns about moral hazard and how IMF's effectiveness in enforcing structural reforms and monitoring outcomes is in politically unstable region. This is also a link to national security, how India's statement linking IMF funds to possible financing of terror activities, it brings national security into economic diplomacy. illustrating how financial flows are no longer purely economic, but they have strategic and ethical implications. And another part in this is IMF and global governance of how global financial institutions function. So, and also opposition versus the government debate. So, how should we balance hardline diplomacy with procedural pragmatism, which is government's absent attention? Non-military options. So, this article talks about India's strategic use of non-military options to counter Pakistan's continued cross-border terrorism, and basically by abstaining from the IMF vote and raising concerns about the misuse of international funds, India has sought to diplomatically isolate Pakistan and undermine its economic stability. So the focus is basically on restricting the international financing and reconsidering the Indus Water Treaty shows a shift towards economic and geopolitical pressure tactics. So these moves, they're grounded in international laws, diplomacy, and reflect India's evolving national security doctrine, which is aimed at deterrence without escalation. Financial sector rushes to fortify cyber defense amid escalation. So we talk about the increased cyber vulnerability of India's financial sector amidst the ongoing tensions. So basically, in a shift and coordinated response, the government has directed banks and insurance firms to strengthen their cybersecurity infrastructure. So this includes setting up QRTs, which is quick response teams, then conducting mock drills and ensuring real-time coordination with national cyber agents like CERTIN. So the emphasis on the securing digital infrastructure in BFSI, e-commerce and telecom sector, it reflects a broader national security strategy wherein cyber defense now complements conventional military preparedness. And also this highlights India's proactive institutional capacity building in response to asymmetric, non-traditional threats like state-sponsored cyber attacks. So, amid the ongoing tension, these are the measures being taken by the states which are vulnerable. So, we have air raid sirens installed on rooftops. Then, the schools, community centers, and basements, how they can be turned into emergency shelters to be, and they are being identified if required, and also they be stocked with the essential supplies. Then, we also have SOPs, drills, schedules, and shelter maps to be prepared and distributed to households via local media, social media, and community volunteers. Then over here, civil defense control rooms also will play an important role and special plans to assist vulnerable groups, having training plans to educate the civilians and districts erected to identify vulnerable areas and critical infrastructure. Then we have the next article, portable cubes reach broader hospitals. So this article highlights India's strategic use of indigenous technological innovation in public health preparedness, particularly through the deployment of the cubes, which are portable modular hospitals along border areas amid the rising tensions. So these mobile units, they're equipped for trauma care in battlefield-like condition, and they showcase India's capability for rapid healthcare deployment in conflicting zones. So the integration of trained personnel, real-time control centers, and the cubes prior deployment in the international crisis, it reflects India's increasing role as both a global and a regional responder. So this basically strengthens not only the internal resilience but also project soft power through humanitarian logistics and innovation. Share of gold in forex reserves. So this article underscores the Reserve Banks of India's strategic shift towards global accumulation in its foreign exchange reserves, with gold share doubling to 11.7% over the past decade. And this move reflects a global central banking trend of hedging against currency volatility and geopolitical risk. Also, the rise in gold reserve, despite moderate growth in total forex asset, also signals India's attempt to diversify beyond dollar-denominated assets, and it also enhances India economic resilience amid the global uncertainties. So, this is important monetary policy foresight and risk management by the RBI. Big four study abroad destinations losing ground. So, over here, we're talking about how there's been a shift in the global study abroad trends, with students increasingly choosing non traditional destinations such as Europe and Asia over the big four study destinations, which has always been US, UK, Australia, and Canada. So, this change is driven by restrictive visa policies, high cost, and limited job opportunities in these countries. Then we have countries like Germany, France, South Korea, and Japan who have started attracting more students due to its affordable education and also better post study work prospects. So, the big countries, they're experiencing decline in the enrollment, especially in Canada and the US, while the European and Asian countries, they see a growth in this area. So this basically reflects a shift in student priorities, focusing on practical outcomes and easier immigration policies. A step ahead, but miles to go. So India's improvement in the 2023 UN Human Development Index. So we moved up from 133 to 130, but we still remain in the medium category, which is just above the low development categories. So, despite a 53% increase in HDI since 1990, which was driven by economic growth and social welfare programs, India lags behind neighbors like China, Sri Lanka, and Bhutan in this ranking. So, over here, when we talk of the key areas for improvement, so they include life expectancy, education, and income. However, we have seen significant regional disparities and growing inequality, with the top 1% holding substantial wealth, which is major challenge in the country. And the report it also highlight how India's rising AI potential, but warns of the risks AI poses to the democracy. So, addressing inequality, gender disparities, and sustainable development, it is essential for India's continued progress. Justice from bottom of the pyramid. So over here we're talking about Justice Bhushan Ramakrishna Gawai, who's set to become India's 52nd Chief Justice, brings a practical and empathetic role approach to his role, and he's a member of the Dalit community. So his career reflects his commitment to social justice, actively seeking peaceful resolutions in civil and matrimonial disputes. He advocates for a creamy layer within the SC/ST community to prevent the privileged from receiving benefits meant for the underprivileged. So he is more focused on pragmatism over strict legal interpretation, emphasizing the complex social, political, and environmental factors involved in this case. And when we talk of his tenure, so that will likely continue the trend of transforming India's judicial landscape with wisdom and focus on fairness. Next issue, Supreme Court says it can't compel any state to adopt national education policy. So the Supreme Court stated how it cannot compel states to adopt the NEP 2020 under Article 32 of the Constitution. And while it can intervene if a state's action regarding NEP violates fundamental right, it cannot issue directives which will mandate the policy's adoption. So the court rejected a PIL, just public interest litigation, who sought a directive for Tamil Nadu to adopt the NEP, including teaching Hindi in schools. So the bench noted that the petitioner, despite being from Tamil Nadu, now resides in Delhi, and the petition did not present any direct cause for intervention. And the court also clarified how NEP does not impose Hindi, but it offers financial assistance for introducing languages like Hindi or English in schools. This was it for today. Thank you, everyone.